There is a detail in this case that almost nobody has talked about, and once you understand what it means, technically, operationally, forensically, you will not be able to look at the footage on that porch the same way again. On February 1st, while Nancy Guthrie was still inside her home, someone in her neighborhood was already winning. Not physically, not yet. Electronically. The cameras that should have captured everything were going dark one by one, and the way they went dark is not something a random person stumbles into. It is something you plan, something you test, something you rehearse. What the FBI found when they went door to door 9 days ago tells us something definitive about the person who took Nancy. Not a theory, not speculation, a technical signature, a digital fingerprint left behind by someone who thought they had erased every fingerprint that mattered. They were wrong. This is the crime files. No sensationalism, no exploitation, just evidence, just analysis, just the pursuit of truth. Nancy Guthrie was 78 years old. She lived alone in the Catalina foothills, a residential area north of Tucson, Arizona, known for its isolation, its desert terrain, its long driveways that separate house from street, and its dark sky ordinances that keep the nights exceptionally dark. She was the mother of Savannah Guthrie, co-anchor of NBC's Today Show. She was a widow. She was described by everyone who knew her as independent, sharp, and deeply private. On the night of February 1st into the early morning hours of February 2nd, Nancy Guthrie disappeared from her own home. The front door was found unlocked. Her medication remained on the counter. Her wallet was untouched. Her phone was left behind. There were no signs of a violent struggle inside the residence. What there was, captured on her own Nest doorbell camera, was a figure on her front porch. Male, approximately 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 inches tall, wearing a dark jacket, dark pants, and a backpack identified as an Ozark Trail model sold at Walmart for approximately $20. He appeared on that porch at 1:47 in the morning. He tapped the camera twice. He disabled it manually, reaching up and physically blocking the lens. And then, 41 minutes later, at 2:28 in the morning, Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker lost its Bluetooth connection to her Apple devices. The connection that had maintained a reliable signal every night for as long as the data existed simply stopped transmitting. She was gone. The Pima County Sheriff's Office responded. The FBI was called in. A search began that, as of this recording, has not produced Nancy Guthrie alive. What it has produced is something else. Something that changes the profile of this suspect entirely. On March 6th, FBI agents and Pima County detectives went door to door throughout Nancy's neighborhood. They were not showing photographs. They were not asking about unfamiliar vehicles or suspicious pedestrians. They were asking one specific question. Did anyone in this neighborhood experience internet disruptions on the night of February 1st? The answer they received should stop every person following this case cold. Multiple homeowners confirmed they had experienced disruptions that night. One neighbor, whose property sits in close proximity to Nancy's, discovered that his Ring camera history for that specific evening was simply not available. Not corrupted, not overwritten by a recording error, not available. A gap where footage should have existed. The homeowner told investigators this had never happened before in the history of his system. But it is not the absence of footage that matters most. It is the geometry of that absence. The cameras on his property that went dark were the cameras on the side of the house facing Nancy's property. The cameras on the opposite side of the same structure, connected to the same router, drawing power from the same source, running on the same network. Those cameras stayed online the entire night. They recorded without interruption. They captured everything they were pointed at. But the cameras pointed toward Nancy Guthrie's home did not capture anything because they were not allowed to. Same router, same network, same power supply, different direction, different outcome. That is not a power failure. That is not a general outage. That is not a glitch in the system. That is surgical precision. And understanding what kind of device produces that kind of result tells us something critical about who was standing in that desert on the night Nancy disappeared. Most people, when they hear the phrase signal jammer, picture one thing: a device that floods a radio frequency with noise, a blunt instrument that knocks out every wireless signal within its range. Every phone, every camera, every smart home device, every Bluetooth speaker, every wireless thermostat, everything within 30 yards goes silent simultaneously. It is the electronic equivalent of cutting the power to an entire block. That is not what happened here. Because Nancy's own Nest camera recorded footage, the FBI retrieved images from it. The suspect is visible on that porch, tapping the lens, standing there in the dark, doing exactly what investigators later described. If a brute force signal jammer had been activated within range of that property, the Nest camera would have been offline before the suspect ever approached the door. It would have captured nothing. There would be no porch footage, There would be no image to release to the public. And Nancy's pacemaker. Her cardiac device maintained its Bluetooth connection to her Apple systems until 2:28 in the morning, 41 minutes after the camera was manually disabled. A blanket jammer operating in the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz bands that home devices use would have severed that pacemaker connection the moment it was activated. The signal would have dropped immediately, not 41 minutes later. Retired FBI Special Agent Jennifer Kaufman identified this contradiction publicly and directly. She stated that whatever caused the disruption near Nancy's home was not a traditional full-spectrum jammer, because the evidence demonstrates it did not block the Nest camera or the pacemaker Bluetooth signal. She concluded this points towards something more targeted, more deliberate, and more technically sophisticated than what most people imagine when they think about surveillance defeat. So what was it? There is a third category of device, one that most people watching true crime content have never encountered. It does not operate by flooding a frequency with noise. It operates by speaking the language of the network itself. It sends what are called deauthentication packets. These are commands that exist within the legitimate architecture of the Wi-Fi protocol. They are instructions that a device or a router sends when it wants to end a connection. Your laptop disconnects from the coffee shop Wi-Fi. Your phone drops off your home network when you leave the house. These are normal, routine, invisible handshakes that happen dozens of times a day on every connected network in the world. A deauthentication attack mimics that handshake. The device sends a command that looks, to the router, like it came from the camera. The router receives it and terminates the connection. The camera receives a matching command that appears to have come from the router. Both ends of the connection believe the other side initiated the disconnection. There is no conflict. There is no error message. There is no alarm. The camera simply goes offline, and the homeowner, when they check their footage the next morning, sees the words that one of Nancy's neighbors saw: not available. The critical distinction between this method and a brute force jammer is directionality. A deauthentication attack can be aimed, not broadcast in every direction at everything within range, but focused, targeted at specific devices on a specific network. From a specific angle, the physical structure of a house becomes a natural boundary. If the device sending the commands is positioned on one side of a building, it reaches the cameras on that side. The cameras on the far side, shielded by the mass of the structure itself, never receive the command. They stay connected. They keep recording, which is precisely, exactly, point for point what happened at the neighbor's property on the night of February 1st. The cameras that faced Nancy's home went dark. The cameras that faced the opposite direction kept recording. The device was positioned somewhere between the two properties, aimed at the side of the neighbor's house that had a line of sight to Nancy's, and whatever was on the other side of that house was irrelevant to whoever was operating it. Now consider what this requires. It requires knowledge of which cameras exist on that property. It requires knowledge of which direction those cameras face. It requires knowledge of which side of that specific house has a line of sight to Nancy's property. It requires an understanding of the angles, the geometry, the coverage gaps, the blind spots. A stranger driving into the Catalina foothills for the first time on the night of February 1st does not possess that knowledge. A stranger does not know that the neighbor's cameras on the north side face toward Nancy and the cameras on the south side face away. A stranger does not know the angles. A stranger does not know where to stand to exploit the gap. That knowledge comes from time, from familiarity, from having been on those streets often enough that the layout of the neighborhood becomes as natural as knowing where the stop signs are on your morning drive. Now go back to January 23rd, 9 days before Nancy Guthrie disappeared. A figure was captured on camera 6.5 miles from her home. He was walking backward in the Catalina foothills, in a residential neighborhood subject to the same dark sky ordinances, the same isolated desert architecture, the same kind of long driveways and camera-equipped homes. He was walking backwards specifically to avoid giving the camera a clear image of his face. When a dog barked from inside one of the homes, he ran, but he maintained his backward posture while running. He would rather fall in the desert in the dark than give a single frame of his face to a recording that might later be reviewed by investigators. That is not panic. That is not instinct. That is deliberate, practiced discipline from someone who has studied how these systems work. Someone who knows that cameras capture faces, someone who has thought carefully about what a camera can and cannot record, and has made an operational decision to exploit that limitation. The same Ozark Trail backpack visible in that footage appears on the porch at Nancy's home 9 days later, and this time, on her porch, he was not walking backward. He was calm. He approached the door. He tapped the camera. He disabled it manually, and the cameras that might have captured his approach, the cameras on the neighbor's property that faced toward Nancy's house, those cameras were already dark before he reached the door. The surveillance architecture of the neighborhood had already been defeated by the time he arrived. January 23rd was a test, a dry run, a rehearsal in a comparable environment. He was learning how cameras respond to a reversed approach. He was mapping the system, and 9 days later, in the target location, he was not learning anything. He was executing. There is a device that makes this possible, and that device has characteristics the FBI is now actively mapping. Former Pima County Sheriff's Deputy Eric Maldonado, who spent nearly 3 decades working burglaries in this exact neighborhood, described 3 distinct categories of signal disruption in an interview following the new developments: cell jammers, Wi-Fi jammers, and deauthentication tools that communicate within the protocol itself to convince devices they have lost connection. He said the technology is inexpensive, under $30 for some configurations, commercially available, legally purchasable, widely distributed, and unlike the brute force devices that law enforcement has historically encountered, the deauthentication class of tool leaves almost no forensic signature in the traditional sense because the commands it sends are indistinguishable from normal network traffic. Almost no forensic signature, but not zero, because the device has a purchase history. If it was bought online, the transaction exists in a fulfillment database. The shipping address exists. The payment method exists. The account used to complete the purchase exists. If it was bought in a physical store, the store has inventory records, point-of-sale data, potentially security footage. If the suspect researched it before purchasing it, which is the behavior of someone acquiring an unfamiliar tool for a specific planned use, that search history exists in their browser. It exists on their internet service provider servers. It exists in the metadata of every device they use to conduct that research. And there is a legal dimension to this that has received almost no attention in the coverage of this case. Operating a Wi-Fi jammer or a deauthentication device in the United States is a federal crime. The Federal Communications Commission is unambiguous on this point. The operation, marketing, or sale of any device designed to block, jam, or interfere with authorized radio communications is prohibited by federal law. Violation carries civil penalties up to $100,000 per incident. It carries the possibility of imprisonment. It carries the potential for equipment seizure. And most importantly for this investigation, it creates a separate investigative thread that operates independently of the kidnapping charge. The FBI does not only have a kidnapping case, they have a federal communications violation, 2 separate statutory frameworks, 2 separate sets of subpoena authority, 2 separate angles from which to approach the same suspect. Now consider the footprint that the device left behind. The FBI is mapping exactly which cameras went offline on the night of February 1st and which cameras did not. The analysis includes which direction each affected camera was facing, the distance between each affected camera and Nancy's property, and the effective radius of the disruption. When that mapping is complete, it will define the coverage footprint of the device, the area within which the deauthentication commands were received, the area outside of which cameras remained operational. That footprint has a center, a point of origin, a location from which the device was operating when the commands were sent. If the device was in the suspect's pocket on Nancy's porch, the center of the footprint is her property. If it was in a vehicle parked on the street before he approached on foot, the center is the street. If it was positioned earlier in the evening at a fixed point in the desert between properties, the center is that position in the desert. Every scenario narrows the geometry, and the geometry tells investigators where the suspect was standing when they activated it. This matters because of another piece of existing evidence. A Ring camera 2.5 miles from Nancy's property outside the disruption zone captured a vehicle at 2:36 in the morning. Nancy's pacemaker went offline at 2:28. The drive between those 2 locations takes approximately 6 minutes. The Pima County Sheriff confirmed publicly that the timing aligns. The vehicle was traveling away from Nancy's neighborhood at the precise interval that would place it there at the moment she was taken. The cameras near Nancy went dark. The camera 2.5 miles away did not, because 2.5 miles was outside the range of whatever was deployed. The device's reach was not unlimited. It was precise. And that precision is an additional data point about the level of planning invested in this operation. You do not bring a precisely calibrated electronic countermeasure to a crime of impulse. You do not carry a device designed to selectively disable neighborhood surveillance in a targeted direction to a crime of opportunity. Those 2 things are incompatible. The cheap backpack, the wrong side holster visible on the porch footage, the items that suggested an unsophisticated actor, those details do not coexist naturally with someone operating a deauthentication tool against multiple residential camera systems in the dark. One of those profiles is real. The other was constructed to mislead anyone who found it. There is another forensic thread in this case that has received almost no attention. A digital analyst with experience in high-profile federal investigations noted that when the suspect was operating near Nancy's property with their phone present, even if they never attempted to connect to her network, her home router may have logged what are called probe requests. Every smartphone with Wi-Fi enabled sends these constantly. They are automatic broadcasts, invisible to the user, that announce the names of networks the device has previously connected to while scanning for available connections nearby. Your phone does this right now. It is broadcasting the names of every Wi-Fi network you have ever joined, asking the air around it whether those networks are within range. If the suspect's phone was within range of Nancy's router on the night of February 1st, and if its Wi-Fi function was active, her router may contain a record of that device's broadcast. A record that includes the name of the suspect's home network, the name of their workplace network, the name of the network at the coffee shop they visit regularly, the name of the network at the gym, the library, the friend's house. A list of every Wi-Fi environment that device has passed through. Written in the probe requests it broadcasts automatically without the owner's awareness. The FBI has Nancy's router. Unlike biological evidence that requires weeks of laboratory processing, router logs can be analyzed in hours. Every device that came within broadcast range of that network on the night of February 1st may have left a record of where it has been and where it belongs, which raises a question that sits at the center of everything the evidence is pointing toward. Was the suspect careful enough to disable their phone's Wi-Fi before approaching? Were they careful enough to activate airplane mode? Were they careful enough to leave the phone at home entirely? Because here is the paradox of electronic countermeasures. The more sophisticated the approach, the more evidence the sophistication generates. A deauthentication device has a purchase history. A jammer has a manufacturer signature. An airplane mode activation at 1:45 in the morning has a timestamp on the carrier's server. A phone that pings every night in a specific neighborhood but shows no signal on the night of February 1st is not invisible. It is a negative print, a silhouette cut into the data. The absence of a signal at a location where that signal has appeared consistently for months or years is not the absence of evidence. It is evidence of absence. And the FBI knows exactly how to read that. Eric Maldonado raised a point during his interview that has stayed with me since I heard it. He said the suspect may not live near this neighborhood. He may live in it. He has spent 30 years working residential burglaries in the Catalina foothill. He has seen cases where the person who targeted a home passed it every single day, not because they drove there to survey it, because they lived there and the surveillance was absorbed unconsciously, the way any resident absorbs the details of their own street without intending to: which cars belong, which driveways are empty during the day, which houses have cameras, and exactly where those cameras are mounted. A stranger who drives into the Catalina foothills for the first time to plan a crime needs weeks to gather that intelligence. A resident accumulates it without trying, over months and years, simply by existing in the neighborhood. And Maldonado noted something else that connects directly to the cell tower analysis. If the suspect lives in the neighborhood, their phone's presence in the tower data from the vicinity of Nancy's home on the night of February 1st is not anomalous. It does not stand out. It does not trigger any flag in a geofence analysis, because that phone is exactly where it is supposed to be every night of the year. Investigators looking for a device that does not belong in the data for that location would never find it, because it belongs there every single day. There is also what the suspect did not take. The medication was on the counter. Her wallet was on a surface inside the home. Her phone was there. Nothing was removed from the house that a robbery-motivated intruder would have taken. The absence of theft in a home invasion case where the intruder spent 41 minutes inside is not an oversight. It is a decision. Maldonado was direct about what that decision communicates. He said, "Nancy is the crime scene. Her body carries every piece of physical evidence that could link the suspect to the location. DNA beneath her fingernails if there was contact, fiber transfer from the suspect's clothing, touch transfer from physical handling, trace evidence from the environment she was transported through." Every criminal following this case knows that DNA is what places you at the scene with certainty. The only object in that house that carried the suspect's biological signature was Nancy herself, and they took her. Nothing else needed to be taken because nothing else could identify them with the specificity that her physical presence could. The decision to leave the wallet, the phone, the medication, while taking a 78-year-old woman is not random. It is a calculation. A cold, deliberate, informed calculation about what constitutes evidence and how to eliminate it. Now consider the figure on the porch from the FBI footage that was released publicly. Something is visible in the pocket of the suspect's jacket or on their person. A shape, a protrusion that does not match the profile of a standard smartphone. Former FBI Special Agent Tracy Walder flagged this publicly and offered two possible explanations: a walkie-talkie or a signal disruption device. She noted both possibilities carry investigative significance, but for different reasons. If it was a walkie-talkie, the suspect was in live communication with at least one other person during the operation: someone in a vehicle, someone at a perimeter position, someone receiving real-time updates on the progress of what was being executed at Nancy's door. That confirms a multi-person operation. It means a second device was active that night. A second device that potentially pinged a cell tower, a second voice on a radio frequency, a second set of hands that handled equipment that has its own purchase history and its own forensic trail. If it was a deauthentication device, the suspect was conducting targeted electronic warfare against the neighborhood's surveillance infrastructure while simultaneously executing the removal of a person from her home. That level of concurrent technical operation does not coexist with incompetence. You do not carry a directional deauthentication tool while being too careless to strap a holster correctly. Those two profiles do not share a person, which means the holster, like the cheap backpack, was a costume, a deliberate misdirection worn by someone who understood that investigators and the public would use visible details to construct a profile, and who constructed a false one for them to find. On March the 2nd, Tommaso Cioni appeared publicly for the first time in weeks. He walked to the memorial outside Nancy's home with Savannah and Annie Guthrie. For more than a month preceding that appearance, he had been essentially absent from the public record. Every member of the Guthrie family had spoken. Savannah posted videos. She appeared on camera expressing anguish. She offered a reward of $1 million. She pleaded directly to whoever had her mother. Cameron, her brother, addressed the kidnapper on video. Annie cooperated with investigators and made public statements. Tommaso said nothing. He appeared nowhere. He released no statement of his own, posted nothing publicly, and was not visible beside his wife during any of the emotional public appeals that defined the first weeks of this investigation. A journalist who has been covering this case closely reported that Tommaso had not been seen in nearly a week before the March 2nd appearance. Then he appeared at the memorial, and within hours, two observations were being made simultaneously by an enormous number of people watching the footage. The first was height. Savannah Guthrie is publicly reported at 5 feet 10 inches. The FBI described the suspect in the porch footage as approximately 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10. For weeks, observers had argued that Tommaso appeared too tall to match the FBI's description, citing estimates of 6 feet or more. But in the memorial footage, standing directly beside Savannah, he is not visibly towering over her. He is close to her height, not dramatically taller. His exact height has never been officially confirmed, but the footage from March 2nd placed him considerably closer to the FBI's stated range than any prior analysis had suggested. The detail that was supposed to eliminate him from consideration may not eliminate him at all. The second observation was movement, the way he walks. Within hours of the memorial footage becoming widely circulated, people were placing it side by side with the FBI porch footage. The gait, the way weight transfers from one foot to the other, the set of the shoulders, the stride length. Forensic gait analysis is a legitimate scientific discipline. It has been accepted as evidence in courts in the United Kingdom and is under active development as an identification tool in multiple jurisdictions. But what was happening online was not controlled forensic analysis. It was pattern recognition distributed across millions of observers examining the same two pieces of footage simultaneously, and an enormous number of them arrived at the same discomfort independently. I am not telling you what those comparisons establish. A side-by-side video overlay viewed on a phone screen is not admissible in any court. What I am telling you is that the question the evidence keeps returning to, the question embedded in the deauthentication attack, in the familiarity with the camera angles, in the knowledge of which side of the neighbor's house faced Nancy's property, that question points toward someone with deep, long-standing, intimate familiarity with the geography of that neighborhood, not someone who drove through it once to plan a crime, someone for whom those streets are ordinary, familiar, known. And Tommaso Cioni has been driving those streets, visiting that property, and moving through that neighborhood regularly for approximately 20 years. That is not an accusation. That is a statement of documented fact about a person the evidence keeps landing near. The investigation has structurally changed in ways that signal forward momentum rather than stagnation. A dedicated task force was established. 4 detectives and a sergeant from the Pima County Sheriff's Department, working full-time out of an FBI field office in Tucson. Understand what that structure means operationally. You do not move local investigators into a federal building to review aging tip-line calls. You do that when you are constructing a prosecution, when you are building a case file that needs federal and county components to coexist in the same physical space, reviewed by the same eyes, cross-referenced against the same evidence. That is pre-indictment architecture. That is what an investigation looks like when it is approaching a known target, not searching for an unknown one. The FBI's door-to-door canvass in Nancy's neighborhood asking specifically about Wi-Fi disruptions is not a routine follow-up action. It is a targeted forensic mapping exercise. They already know something disrupted those cameras. They are now building a precise geometric record of which devices were affected, At what times, in what directions. That record will define the footprint, and the footprint will define the position. Savannah Guthrie returned to the Today Show studio. She has said publicly that the family knows Nancy may no longer be alive. They have accepted that possibility as something they have had to make peace with. What they have not accepted, what they will not accept, is never knowing where she is. Never having an answer. The dog in the neighbor's yard also matters. The same neighbor whose cameras went dark that night told reporters that his dog woke in the middle of the night and demanded to be let outside. This dog, by its owner's account, sleeps through the night without exception. On this night, it woke and went to the door. And when it got outside, it was oriented toward Nancy's property, not toward the desert wash where coyotes pass, not toward the road, toward the specific direction where the deauthentication device was likely being operated. At the exact moment, the cameras on that side of the house were going offline. Eric Maldonado addressed this directly. He said dogs remain arguably the most reliable home security system in existence because of their capacity to detect frequencies and sounds that lie entirely outside human perception. Whether that animal detected the electronic signature of a device operating on a nearby frequency, heard footsteps in the desert between the two properties, or sensed a human presence moving through the darkness toward Nancy's home, it reacted to something real. Something that the cameras at that exact moment could no longer see. The oldest detection system on Earth corroborated what the cameras could not record. Now hold all of it together. Someone deployed a device on the night of February 1st that selectively disabled the cameras with a direct line of sight to Nancy Guthrie's property while leaving cameras on the opposite side of the same structure unaffected. That person knew which direction those cameras faced. They knew the geometry of the street. They had knowledge of the neighborhood's surveillance architecture that can only come from sustained, repeated, intimate familiarity with that specific environment. They did not trigger a single cell tower anomaly despite the FBI deploying its full digital forensic capability and pulling tower dumps for multiple dates. If their phone was present, it belonged in the area data. It was not a signal that appeared once and vanished. It was a signal that is there every night. They spent 41 minutes inside a home belonging to a 78-year-old woman and took nothing except the one object that carried their biological evidence. They navigated a dark house without hesitation. They made a series of operational decisions that reflect not anxiety or improvisation, but familiarity and preparation. They appeared on a porch camera holding or carrying something in their pocket that does not match a phone. And they had tested a directly comparable environment 9 days before the operation on January 23rd, walking backward past a camera 6.5 miles away in a neighborhood with the same physical characteristics, confirming how the system responds before returning to execute at the target location. Every layer of physical, digital, and behavioral evidence in this case points in the same direction. Not at a stranger passing through, not at a random predator who discovered Nancy Guthrie by chance, at someone who knew the neighborhood from the inside, who knew the cameras, who knew the angles, who knew the routines, who knew which side of which house faced which property and why that mattered? Who brought the technology to exploit that knowledge? And who constructed a visible surface appearance? The cheap backpack, the wrong holster, the apparent lack of sophistication, specifically to mislead anyone who found the footage. The technology that was supposed to protect Nancy failed her on the night of February 1st, but the technology that was used to defeat it is now being mapped, traced, and forensically reconstructed by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, with the full weight of federal law and a dedicated joint task force operating from a shared space in Tucson. Every device leaves a trace. Every purchase has a record. Every probe request has a destination. Every gap in cell tower data has a shape. And the FBI is now building a map of exactly where the suspect was standing when they pressed the button. When that map is complete, it will show a footprint. And that footprint has only one center. Let us go deeper into the technical evidence. Because the deauthentication attack is not just a single data point, it is a thread that, when pulled, unravels the entire narrative of a disorganized, impulsive intruder that the visible surface details of this case were designed to suggest. To understand what the device does at a technical level, you need to understand how Wi-Fi networks communicate in the first place. When you connect a Ring camera or a Nest doorbell to your home network, the camera and the router establish what is called an authenticated association. They exchange a handshake, agree on encryption keys, and maintain an ongoing conversation that allows video data to flow from the camera to your network and then to the cloud. That conversation is built on the IEEE 802.111 wireless protocol, the same technical foundation that every Wi-Fi network on the planet operates on. Within that protocol, there are management frames. These are administrative messages that devices use to handle the mechanics of connection and disconnection. One type of management frame is the deauthentication frame. It is the formal message a device sends when it wants to end its association with the network. Your laptop sends one when you click disconnect. Your phone sends one when it goes to sleep and drops the connection to conserve battery. These frames are part of normal, expected network behavior. Here is the vulnerability. In the original design of the 802.11 protocol, management frames, including deauthentication frames, were not authenticated. They were not cryptographically signed to verify that they actually came from the device or router they claim to come from. This means any device within wireless range of a network can send a deauthentication frame that appears to both the router and the target device to have come from a legitimate source. A deauthentication attack exploits this by sending a continuous stream of these spoofed management frames. The camera receives them repeatedly. Each one tells the camera its connection has been terminated. The camera tries to reconnect. Another frame arrives immediately, terminating the reconnection attempt before it completes. The camera enters a continuous cycle of attempting to re-establish its association with the network and being told again and again that the association has ended. From the outside, it appears offline. Its video feed stops transmitting. Its motion detection alerts stop generating. Its recording ceases. To the homeowner checking the app, it looks like an outage, like a router restart, like a temporary glitch in a system that will come back online shortly. But it does not come back online as long as the attack is running. And the moment the attack stops, the camera reconnects and resumes normal function. There is no damage. There is no corrupted hardware. There is no evidence in the camera itself that anything unusual occurred. The gap in the recording history is real, but the camera is fine. It simply was not allowed to communicate while the attacker needed it silent. The tools that execute this attack are well documented in the cybersecurity research community. They have been available for years. Some are embedded in widely distributed wireless auditing software. Some are purpose-built devices sold commercially in the network security space. The hardware required is minimal. A single board computer the size of a deck of cards, a directional Wi-Fi antenna, and open-source software that can be downloaded in minutes. The entire assembly can fit in a jacket pocket. It can be operated from a smartphone application. It requires no technical expertise to use once it is configured, and configuration instructions are available in detail across multiple platforms. The cost, as multiple investigators in this case have confirmed publicly, is under $50 for a complete functional system. In some configurations, under $30. None of this is classified knowledge. None of this requires specialized training. What it requires is awareness. Awareness that the technology exists, awareness of what it can do, and awareness of how to apply it in a specific environment to produce a specific outcome. Someone who does not know deauthentication attacks are possible cannot plan around using one. Someone who knows they exist and understands their geometry can plan an entire operation around exploiting them. The question this technology raises is not whether the suspect could have acquired it. The question is how they knew to look for it. Most people who commit crimes involving residential properties, including most burglaries, most home invasions, most residential kidnappings, do not research wireless network protocol vulnerabilities before executing them. They check whether a camera is visible. They wear a hood. They approach from an angle. They may smash a camera or spray it with paint. These are physical, blunt responses to a physical obstacle. They do not involve understanding that a camera's connection to its network can be severed by sending spoofed management frames from a device in a jacket pocket without touching the hardware. The level of technical research that produced this approach tells us something about the suspect's information environment, about the communities they participate in, about the research they have done, about the problems they have thought carefully about, and the solutions they have sought for those problems. Someone who arrives at a deauthentication attack as a solution to the problem of residential camera coverage has been thinking about this problem specifically. They have done research. They have read documentation. They have visited forums or communities where this knowledge exists. And all of that research left a digital trail that the FBI is equipped to find. Now step back from the technology for a moment and consider the timeline that the evidence establishes across the full span of this investigation. January 23rd, a figure is captured on camera in the Catalina foothills walking backward. He is 6.5 miles from Nancy's residence. The neighborhood he has selected for this test has the same physical characteristics as hers. Dark sky ordinances, isolated desert homes, long driveways, camera-equipped properties. He has not chosen a random location. He has chosen an analog, a simulation environment. He is testing a specific behavior, the backward walk approach, against a system that is comparable to his actual target environment before deploying it at the target. When a dog barks inside one of the homes he is passing, he runs. But he runs backward. He will not face a camera even while fleeing. The discipline is total. February 1st, 40 minutes into the early morning, the cameras at a neighboring property that have a line of sight to Nancy's home begin experiencing connection interruptions. The interruption is directional. Only the cameras on the side facing Nancy's property go dark. The cameras on the opposite side of the same structure remain operational. The neighbor's dog wakes and insists on going outside. It orients toward Nancy's property. The Ozark Trail backpack appears on Nancy's porch at 1:47 in the morning. The figure taps the Nest camera twice and manually disables it. 41 minutes pass. The pacemaker signal drops at 2:28. February 2nd. The morning brings the discovery. The door unlocked. The medication on the counter. The wallet untouched. The phone left behind. The first responders. The FBI. The beginning of a search that has now entered its second month. March the 2nd. Tommaso Cioni appears publicly for the first time in weeks. The internet measures heights and analyzes stride patterns. The conversation about his absence does not go away. March 6th. FBI agents and Pima County detectives go door to door in Nancy's neighborhood, asking specifically about Wi-Fi disruptions. They are building a map. They are defining a footprint. They are finding the center. These events do not form a random sequence. They form a deliberate progression with a consistent internal logic. A subject who planned, tested, refined, deployed, and then waited while the investigation worked outward from the visible evidence toward the digital and forensic evidence that the planning had tried to eliminate. There is something important to say about what was not in this case during the first 5 weeks of the investigation. In almost every modern residential abduction, cell tower analysis produces results within days. The FBI's capacity for geofence analysis, the ability to pull data from every device that pinged a cell tower within a defined geographic area during a defined time window, is sophisticated and rapid. Multiple tower dumps from multiple dates were executed in this investigation. The phone that appeared near a comparable property on January 23rd should have appeared again near Nancy's property on February 1st, and should have been identified through cross-referencing those two data sets. The same device, the same signal signature, 2 dates, 2 locations connected by a single person and a single backpack. That identification has not been publicly announced. More than 5 weeks into an FBI investigation with full digital forensic capability, no suspect has been identified through cell tower data. There are a limited number of explanations for this. Either the device that was present during the operation was eliminated from the data through effective countermeasures, such as airplane mode, a burner phone purchased in cash, or a device left behind entirely. Or the device is present in the data but does not stand out, because its presence in the Catalina foothills on the night of February 1st is expected, because that device is there every night, because its owner lives there, because the geofence data, when the FBI queries it for anomalous devices that appeared only on the night of the crime, returns nothing anomalous, because nothing about that device's presence is unusual to the system. These two explanations are not mutually exclusive. A person who lives in the neighborhood and therefore has an expected device signature in the local cell data, who also brought a secondary burner device to the location on the night of the operation, would generate both outcomes simultaneously. The primary phone would be invisible by virtue of normalcy. The secondary device, if it existed, would be invisible by virtue of design. What the investigation cannot account for, what no amount of operational sophistication can eliminate, is the physical evidence that the FBI's door-to-door canvas is now constructing. The map of disabled cameras, the geometry of the disruption footprint, the probe request logs in Nancy's router, the purchase records for whatever device was operating in that neighborhood that night, the search history of whoever researched it. These are not things that can be erased by turning a phone off. They are data that lives on servers, in databases, in fulfillment records, in the logs of internet service providers. They exist independent of the suspect's awareness of them, and the FBI has subpoena authority over all of it. Consider, too, what the forensic reconstruction of the timeline tells us about the 41 minutes. The figure on the porch arrived at 1:47 in the morning. The pacemaker signal dropped at 2:28. 41 minutes between the moment the camera was manually disabled and the moment Nancy's last digital connection to the world went silent. What happened during those 41 minutes? The medications were not taken. The wallet was not taken. The phone was not taken. Nancy was taken. 41 minutes in a home where the intruder ultimately removed only one thing. That duration suggests several possibilities that the evidence supports in varying degrees. The first is persuasion or coercion without physical violence. A conversation of some kind. Nancy may have been awake. She may have responded to the presence at her door in the way any person might respond to someone they recognize. Someone whose presence at their door at 1:47 in the morning would not require them to immediately defend themselves. Someone whose arrival, however unexpected, would not immediately register as a threat. The second is navigation. A house at night requires knowledge to move through efficiently. Where the bedroom is, where the exits are, where the relevant personal objects might be located. A stranger navigating an unfamiliar home in complete darkness, under operational time pressure, would move differently than someone who has been in that home before, someone for whom the layout is already understood. The third is communication. If the figure on the porch was in contact with a second person via walkie-talkie or phone, the 41 minutes may have included coordination, updates on interior status, confirmation of departure timing, communication with a vehicle positioned nearby, waiting for the signal to approach. None of these scenarios require speculative assumptions. All of them are consistent with the physical evidence, with the timing data, and with the behavioral profile that the rest of the case has established. Each one points, in its own way, toward someone who did not encounter Nancy Guthrie as a stranger. The FBI's task force structure reinforces this read of the evidence. 4 detectives and a sergeant from Pima County embedded in a federal building, working alongside FBI agents, reviewing evidence from a shared physical location. This structure is used for one purpose in law enforcement: building a case for prosecution, not searching for an unknown subject, not reviewing tips from the public, not beginning the investigative process, finalizing it, assembling the evidence into a package that will support charges, withstand legal scrutiny, and produce a conviction. You do not build that structure around a mystery. You build it around a target. The evidence knows where it is pointing. The question is, how long before the investigation assembles the last piece of the picture that everyone following this case has already begun to see? Nancy Guthrie was a real person. She is a mother, a grandmother, a woman who lived alone in the desert and valued her independence and her privacy and her life. Whatever happened in that house during those 41 minutes, whatever happened in the hours and days after her pacemaker went silent, she deserved none of it. Her family deserves answers. Her daughter deserves to know where her mother is. The person who took her believed they had constructed a perfect operational silence. They had disabled the cameras. They had taken the evidence. They had dressed in a costume of incompetence designed to mislead. They had navigated the digital landscape with enough sophistication to avoid easy identification through cell tower data. But they left behind a deauthentication footprint that the FBI is now mapping to a specific position on a specific street on a specific night. They left behind probe requests in a router that the FBI now possesses. They left behind a purchase record somewhere in a database they cannot access and cannot delete. They left behind a search history on a server they do not control. They left behind a dog that heard them in the dark and faced the direction they were standing and would not stop until its owner came outside. And they left behind 41 minutes of time inside a house that belongs to someone, time that carries its own forensic weight, its own behavioral signature, its own story about who the person was that spent it there and what they knew about the space they were moving through. The map is almost complete. The footprint has an origin point. The investigation is not widening, it is converging. And the difference between a cold case and a prosecution is not the quality of the evidence. It is the assembly of it. The moment when every thread that has been pulled separately is woven into a single coherent structure that a jury can follow from beginning to end without a break in the chain. That structure is being built right now in a federal building in Tucson by 4 detectives and a sergeant and the agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation who have been working this case since the morning of February 2nd. They know what they know, and what they know has a name. This is not just a story. It is Nancy Guthrie's life. It is her family's grief. It is a case built crime by crime, layer by layer, toward a conclusion that the evidence has been pointing at for weeks. The search for truth continues.